Hey team, and welcome to the one where we talk about plot. Alright, so I am up and unshowered and vlogging at this hour because I've decided I want to go to Lowe's to try to fix an issue that I've been having in my videos, which is lighting. So I'm showered now. Lowe's was kind of a bust. They didn't have exactly everything I wanted, and I also don't exactly know everything that I need to do what I want to do. So I need to do a little bit more research, but I did get an idea of what it's going to cost probably, which isn't too much, thank God. But yeah, so I'm headed out now to go to this NaNoWriMo workshop, and I will see you guys after to let you know what I learned. So I just got back from this class about plot, and just like last week how we talked about characters, let's do the same thing about plot. In the same sense that you have to make decisions on your characters about how old they are, what they look like, what their motives are, you have to make similar decisions with your plot. So some of the things that we need to think about when we're talking about plot in NaNoWriMo is, do we want to kind of structure our story and make it rock solid before we start the month, or do we want to kind of fly by the seat of our pants? And that's where the two terms for this come from. There's planners and there are pantsers. In my past, I've been much more of a pantser when I've been writing, and that's mostly due to the fact that not having a deadline allows me to kind of flounder, and although it's maybe not the quickest way to finish a story, it does let me explore more things and I can just kind of go off on tangents. However, when you only have a month to get 50,000 words down, it may be beneficial to you to come up with some sort of outline, and that's what I think I'm going to do this year. It's not going to be so rock solid and rigid that I won't break from it or write something down a path that I didn't think I would get down, but it's nice to have at least some semblance of an idea of what your story starts as, where it's going to go, and how it's going to end. Act 1 of your story is the beginning, and it's going to introduce the readers to who your main character is, any kind of connective characters, secondary characters, the antagonist, the setting of the story, and typically kind of the world as its normal state. Now, sometimes the antagonist isn't introduced in the beginning of a novel, sometimes they're kind of a plot twist that comes at the end, but for most people, we'll get some idea of what the main conflict is in the story at the beginning. It'll be teased at least. And the purpose of the beginning of your book is going to be to set the world and your character up so that when we get to Act 2, we can flip it on its head and we can thrust our character into action. Typically, the middle of your book is going to be Act 2, and that is like the meat and potatoes, nitty-gritty of what's coming down the pipeline. That is where the stakes are raised and your character is in a world that they don't necessarily recognize and are put into some sort of action to either get back the world that it was in Act 1 or achieve some new milestone. This is my favorite part to write. It's typically where I have the first idea for a book or movie that I'm going to write, is somewhere in this section. A lot of times it's also kind of hard because typically this is the longest section. In screenwriting, you typically consider the first section, Act 1, to be a quarter, and then the middle section is 2 quarters, so half of the book or half of the script. It's just a lot. You have to constantly bombard your characters with conflict that they must overcome so that the story is interesting, the stakes are raised to a climax, and that climax sells off the things that were set up in the beginning of your book to be resolved at the end, and everyone can be happy. It doesn't mean it has to be a happy ending, but to resolve that climax is the point of the story. And then the ending of your book is obviously the resolution. So your climax comes and something big has happened, and the last part of your book will resolve those conflicts. And hopefully everything that you've set up at the beginning of the book and in the middle of the book is paid off by the end. That is the point of the ending of a book, or Act 3, is to pay off all of the promises that we've made previously in the book. Now, explaining it that way makes it sound a lot easier sitting here on my couch not typing any words than it actually is. So how do we get there? How do we get enough conflict and enough oomph in this little baby of ours that is this novel to be able to start day 1, November 1st, and on day 30 have 50,000 words? Well, there are a few techniques. You can outline, just a straight outline like you would take notes, and this is Act 1 and these are all the things that happen, and this is Act 2 and these are all the things that happen, this is Act 3, and these are all the things that happen, and just keep slicing and dicing stuff in there until you feel like you have enough like meat on that bone to where you can tear into it and get 50,000 words. Another option is going through a plot chart, which I can link a couple down below, and basically they have sweet diagrams and lines and stuff that connect plot points, and they're easy to fill out, and sometimes I find when I fill them out, it actually hinders my progress because I try to be too narrow with it. What I typically like to do is write a rough sketch, and just in plain English, no bullet points, nothing. This is Act 1, this is where the character starts, this is where they're going to end, and these are the big things that are going to happen in between, just as really simple sentences. And that gives me enough wiggle room to add in crazy things in the middle, and it also gives me enough of a structure to know that this is the point that I need to get to. The beginning of Act 1 and the end of Act 1, the beginning of Act 2 are going to be pretty rigid, but I give myself a lot of wiggle room in the middle to get there. Now, this may not always work because you could run out of steam before you get to that point, and you come up and you have an Act 2 that is half as long as it needs to be. This is a real problem. So to not have that issue happen, I have 7 questions you can ask yourself before you get started writing that may help you kind of shape the plot before you ever actually start writing in your book. And these 7 questions were provided to us at this meeting. So if you can answer these 7 questions, then you have at least enough of an idea to be able to have a novel. If you have a struggle with answering any of these 7 questions, you may want to make sure that you dial them in before November turns around. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself trying to answer them on the fly. And for some people that works, but for some people it doesn't. If you're like me and you're kind of nervous about not making it through to the end of the month, maybe make sure you have these 7 questions answered. All right, so number 1 is going to be, who is the story about? It's pretty simple, but it's also a really important question. Who is your main character or main characters? To answer this question, the best thing I can tell you is to think about who your character is, what their motivations are, what they think about themselves, who or what other people think about them, who they associate with, their past, and what their present looks like in their mind, and what kind of decisions they would make if they were thrown into the situation that you're about to throw them in. Number 2, the second question you have to ask yourself is, what does my character or characters want? What's their motivation? At the beginning of the story, they're going to have some sort of desire. Does that desire change when they hit that Act 2 break? Or does it only grow deeper and they realize that it's something that they need to go have? A character's motivations are going to inform every decision they make throughout the story. Number 3 is going to be what or who is standing in your character's way. This can be the society they live in, another person. It can be themselves. It can be evil next door neighbor dog. It can be anything, but we need to figure out who the antagonist is in your story. There are so many options available. It doesn't have to be a person. It can be a place. It can be society. It can be God. Who is standing in your character's way, preventing them from getting what they want? Number 4 is, what choice or sacrifice does my character have to make? This is typically asked of the character around the Act 2 break, and it's where the world flips on its head. They are presented with a choice or a sacrifice that they must decide to do. This bleeds into the next question. So question 5 is, do I do this or that? These are the 2 options that the character has. And when we think about this, it's, do I try to save the world or not? These are big answers that will generate the conflict for the rest of the story. This also bleeds into the last 2 questions. So question 6 is, what are the consequences of if I do this? And number 7 is, what are the consequences if I do that? These are the answers to what happens if I don't act, or what happens if I do act, or what happens if I act in the way that I would normally act, or what happens if I act in a way that matches up to the new world I've been thrust into. These are important questions to ask of your character, and they're the motivation for the meat and potatoes Act 2 part of your story. All right, so now that I've gone over the 7 questions, I'm going to run through these 7 questions very quickly for the story that I'm writing, which I haven't talked about yet on YouTube, so we are going to find out about it very quickly right now. All right, so number 1, who is my story about? My story is about a boy named George who is 16 years old and lives in a dystopian near future where the cities are walled off and there are rural areas on the other side. He was once a rural kid whose family, and it's just him and his mother, won the lottery to get into the city. Once you're in the city, it was supposed to be pristine and nice and everything would be great. It's some sort of utopia. However, we find out that the people who win the lottery typically aren't put into the utopia. You have to have money to be there. They're more of a slave labor force and are thrown into a slum. What does the character want? Well, George is a very smart boy, and all he really wants is to go to school. This is what his mom's been feeding him since he was a little boy, is that they would get into the city, he would go to school, and he could be a success. And he would be able to live a good life and be better. His life would be better than his mother's was, and he would be able to have children and have them grow up and be successful. This is what George wants because it's been instilled in him since an early age that this is what he would get. What is standing in my character's way is that while he is very smart and he has passed all of the tests to get into the good school, the city believes that he is too old and his family is too poor to allow him to get into the good school, even though they were promised that once they got to the city, everybody had a fair shot. What choice or sacrifice does my character have? So he is now down and out because he has found out that he can't get into the school, and the only way to provide for his family or to get into the school is to pay for it. So he has to make a choice. Does he want to go ahead and live the life that he lived on the outside of the city, just inside of the city, being a servant and essentially never making it anywhere? Or does he want to try to grab life by the horns and make it? So he has to decide, am I going to try to find a way to find a large sum of money, or am I not? At a certain point during my first act, George is going to meet another character named Tyne. Tyne is another slum dweller in this city, and her family has been in the city since the apocalypse, and she's learned to fend for herself. She's a small-time pickpocket, but her mom's come down on hard luck, and her mom actually needs money to pay off a debt that she has. Tyne has an idea to essentially stage a robbery of one of the local businesses, and George is presented with this opportunity. Tyne knows what she's doing when it comes to a small-scale kind of operation, but they have to concoct a plan to steal a large sum of money from some not-so-nice people. So he has the choice of whether he wants to do it or whether he doesn't. So the consequences of these actions, if he doesn't do it, if he doesn't go ahead with the robbery, he feels as though he will always be just another slum boy who has a shit job, who can't afford to do anything or provide any kind of future for next generations, and won't be able to take care of his mother very well other than just working his life away. And if he does do it, the consequences are he could possibly get in trouble. He could get in trouble with the people who own the business, who are, like I said, not very nice people. And he could also get in trouble with the law or get shot, killed. There's 100 reasons not to do it, but sometimes you have to fight for what you really want. So that is the basic kind of answer to the 7 questions for my story. And if down below you have any questions about these questions, feel free to go ahead and shout them out to me. As always, I appreciate comments. If you have any questions about NaNoWriMo in general or any of the other videos that I've done, feel free to reach out to me down there. Always, if you hit the like button, it's super awesome. And if you want to share this video, that would be amazing, and I would love you forever. Also, if you want to keep up with my progress, I'm going to be doing a video a day during Nano, so hit that subscribe button down below. And I just wanted to take this time to say thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I really do appreciate all of the kind feedback that I've gotten about these YouTube videos since I started a little over a month ago. I'm up to 50 subscribers now, and that is super awesome, and I appreciate all of the comments and the likes and the views that you guys have given. So thank you. Thank you very much. As always, I will see you next Sunday with another Nano video, and I'll be posting another web developer video on Monday. So if you guys are into that too, feel free to check that out tomorrow. I will see you guys next week.